Hello, and it's 1940. Goodness gracious me. And today we're dealing with the major Allied navies of 1940. So, hello everyone. If I'm not mistaken, today, when you're seeing this, is Thursday, although I'm recording this on last Friday. Continuing again with Wayne Boring's suggestion, this is now set forward to the date of January the 1st, 1940. What are the weaknesses in January 1st, 1940, and how best to fix them? Remember, war has now begun for some of these powers. France. France has a large fleet spread out around the world. This is a list of where all the ships are. It's tiny, I know, the writing, but it has to be to fit it all on the screen. They are all around the world, and France is doing its best to fill all its roles, to be all to all people. It's doing its best to support the British, and it's doing its best to look after its own interests. It's doing its best to be present in the Far East and the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. It's doing its best to have strength everywhere. That's not a good decision for it. The weakness of the French Navy from the beginning is that they have not enough ships, not enough support, and honestly, the weakness that is starting to come through at this point in 1940 is that there is a big difference between the various schools of thought in the French Navy about what they're going to do. The school of thought which the Royal Navy have been used to hearing is that they will be fighting alongside the British till the end, till the bitter end. No matter what happens, they'll never desert. But even in January 1940, there are issues starting to emerge. There are very proactive officers and very proactive ships. There are other ships which are split, and you have crew aboard expecting them to be more proactive, and they're not. And it's an interesting thing to listen to reports about. It's an interesting thing to think about as well. The French Navy is in a catch-22 in January 1940. They don't know how the war's going to go. They're in the middle of the phony war. There's not even been the invasion of Norway yet. So, yeah, for them, they're doing everything they can. What should they be doing? Well, that's open to debate. Should they be absolutely ramping up carrier construction? Probably. Anything to get the burn out of water. That's a personal preference. But should they be deploying forces further afield? Should they be creating strategic depth in case the worst case things happen to France? Well, to an extent, they presume they're doing that because of the huge concentration of ships they have down at Toulon. They have them on a whole other side of France from where the fighting is taking place. And yes, there is the likelihood of Italy getting involved, but the Italians would have to go through mountains. The Germans have a slightly more interesting route. Ultimately, less stony and less we're not going to get past this, are we? Nope. But there's only so much they can do. And it is, of course, as we all know, ends up with Mers el Kabir because they cannot square the circle. They cannot make up in January 1940 for the institutional issues that the lack of spending, the lack of investment has created over the last 20, 30 years. You cannot suddenly turn up to a party and go, we're going to change everything. They might want to, they might hope to, but they can't actually do that. So the French Navy of 1940, its course is set. The only difference they could thoroughly have started making is start laying down a policy of where you go if the worst happens, where you deploy to, how you fight from. But again, that's admitting the worst would happen and actually thinking the worst would happen, because it all happens very quickly. That's the whole point. Blitzkrieg and the Ardennes Forest takes the French political establishment by shock, by horror. They're almost catapulted back to the Franco-Prussian War and the torment of that. The fall of the last Napoleon. They had so prepared themselves to fight a certain war. They had so focused on fighting that war and the enemy falling into their plans and doing exactly what they're telling the enemy to do, that when the enemy does something different, as quickly as the military tries to react, hamstrung by radios and other issues, the French political class is devastated. Because they've spent years preaching, to an extent, like people I've quoted in other videos, disarmament as being the way to peace. Or alternatively, spending only on these fixed fortifications so they can make war impossible. It didn't happen. And I return again to Sivi Pacem Parabellum. Those who seek peace should prepare for war. Or another turn of phrase, let your wars be BLOODY drills, and your drills be bloodless battles or bloodless wars. Let's see if YouTube allows it. Let your wars be bloody drills, and your drills bloodless battle or bloodless wars. Can also be battles. I prefer it in the wars translation variation. But the first one I learned was the battles one. It's a mighty fine ship. The French Navy is a mighty fine navy. But they have issues. Lots of them. And one of the fundamental issues is that, honestly, for 25 plus years at this point, well, no, not 25 years plus years, 15 plus years, they presume they're going to have peace. I would argue that the French army, which is so gutted at Verdun and other battles in World War One, so that by basically 1918 it's not really able to advance, doesn't really recapture its full support of the nation and its full national capabilities of the French army, the reputation it deservedly has through history for 25 years from that point. I would say from 1917 till 1942, the French army is hamstrung by various realities of war and politics. Not its own fault. And the French Navy is just the same. It just is. The British. Well, I can tell you a decision I wouldn't do in 1940. Because let's have a look at this when I expand this out. These are ships which are going through things. There are C-class cruisers being converted into AA cruisers. There are Hunt-class escort destroyers being built. All good things. I will support these to the nth degree. But some bright spark named Winston Churchill comes in with World War I doctrine in his mind, goes, we're fighting a war against the Germans. We don't need ships and carriers. We'll focus in on submarine, anti-submarine warfare escorts. And you can see this because if we consider Illustrious, theoretically should take the longest of any ship in its class to be completed. It's laid down in April 1937. That's ordered in April. Laid down April 1937. Launched April 1939 and commissioned May 1940. It is actually delayed, sort of by the war and by the decision to pause, but it's not that much. Formidable, which is laid down 2 months after Illustrious, 17th of June 1937, is launched 17th of August 1939, is not commissioned till November 1940. So, it is laid down 2 months after her. It is launched 4 months after her. And it's commissioned 6 months after her. Victorious. Ordered January 1937. Actually, the first of the class to be ordered. Laid down May 1937. The second to be laid down. Only the second by about a week. Honestly, it's the 4th of May versus the 27th of April. Launched 14th of September 1939. So it's gone from being a week behind Illustrious to somehow, and I'm not quite sure how this is, to somehow being over 5 months behind Illustrious. Commissioned May 1941, a year behind Illustrious. Now, you can say, well, hang on, Alex, these figures are happening before war really starts. And I would agree, yes. There are some issues with Vickers, Armstrong's Wall's End and Vickers and Harlan and Wolff in the construction of these ships. They are learning how to construct them. But May 1941 to commissioning? It shouldn't have taken. It didn't take that long. That was the pause. And then on top of this, we have Indomitable herself, the 4th of the class, the slightly modified vessel, I do admit. 6th of July 1937 is ordered. Laid down 10th of November 1937. So laid down 7 months after Illustrious. Launched March 1940. Launched 11 months after Illustrious. Commissioned October 1941. October. Let's go over that again. October. 17 months after Illustrious. Now, there are good reasons. There are good things going on and commitments. But the thing is, even the British at the time were going, hang on, we need carriers. We need carriers. We need organic aviation. You know why we need organic aviation? Because of the Far East. We might need aircraft support because we can't presume on being in range of air defenses there, of land-based aircraft operating there. We need aircraft for the Mediterranean because we can't presume of being in range of land-based aircraft in the Mediterranean. We need all sorts of things. And it doesn't happen. It's not there. Now, I can understand why there's the pause in capital ships, and we'll get into those and the pause in capital ship construction. There is a superiority of numbers scenario. However, aircraft carriers, you're not building them because you outnumber, because of the German aircraft carriers. They have none in service at this point. They never have any in service. You're building them because they're key enablers of your task groups, of your battle groups. They're key for anti-submarine warfare. They're, Courageous is actually sunk hunting submarines. There you go. The major losses for the Royal Navy, and they've lost them in 1939. You know that. You've lost a ship. You're going to lose another one this year. You don't know it. And more. And aircraft carriers you need to replace. Losing Royal Oak is an annoying blow. Losing Courageous and Glorious is frankly devastating. But if we go back to this figure, if those ships had managed to keep pace, if even the drop behind of Formidable, which is ordered a month before Illustrious, and Victorious, which is ordered 2 months before Illustrious, even if they just kept pace in terms of being a month and 2 months behind in terms of their construction, the Royal Navy could have had May, June, July entering in of these ships, or rather May, July, and June. However, Victorious falls massively behind. Massively behind. As does Formidable. Churchill is appointed in September 1939, and it's one of the first decisions he takes is the slowdown. This does have a massive impact on Victorious mostly, but it has an impact on the commissioning of Illustrious, which is one of the reasons why she takes the time she does to commission, and has an impact on all the other ships following her. And yes, it had been sensible in World War I, but in World War II, you needed carriers, and lots of people are telling him that. They're not supporting carriers because they see carriers as a replacement for battleships. Please note that. No one is seeing carriers as a replacement for battleships at this point. They're seeing them as an adjunct to. But the trouble is, the Royal Navy's carrier force, despite having 7 carriers, is considered A, too old. They all needed, quite a lot of them needed replacing. And B, looking at the scenario you've got, you're going to need more because carriers are considered essential for commerce protection, for commerce interdiction, for organic air support of the battle fleet, for anti-submarine warfare on a wider hunting group scale. All these things rest on air power, and this is what's under construction. So what would I do in January 1940 if I was Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty at this point? Well, I'd be putting the pedal to the metal on the carriers. I mean, them, Unicorn, every single carrier I can get being rapidly built, I would be getting built. The moment I lost a carrier, I would be screaming for more. Because all the facts show how useful they are. And that wouldn't be out of step for Churchill because he had been a massive proponent of naval aviation. So why he suddenly turns around and goes, "Oh, I'll slow their construction," I do not know. What would have it had as an impact? Well, stopping Courageous and Glorious getting sunk, that takes a lot of changing of history. Building these ships to a schedule when their components are mostly sitting there, without interrupting the flow of corvettes and hunt escort destroyers and conversions of C-class cruisers to AA cruisers, that requires a little finessing, but ultimately a lot less change of history. What does it mean? Well, it could mean you have a pair of armoured carriers taking part in Taranto. A pair. You could double your strike group if you wanted of Swordfish. And we've been over that before. That would have an impact. These things all have a cumulative impact. If, by any chance, you cause enough trouble at Taranto, you therefore cause enough issues that hopefully the Italians don't get involved in Crete. If Crete doesn't fall and you don't have the issues of evacuating Crete, you hopefully don't lose the ships there, in which case you have a lot more ships going around for other operations, which might make supply runs to Malta easier, but also might mean when it comes to deploying things to the Far East, etc., you're more free to deploy stuff to the Far East, and there might well be a carrier or two even as part of the operations group there. Everything has a long-term impact. And I can make the case for this without any foreknowledge. Mainly because these losses have an impact. You've lost a battleship, one of the few upgraded battleships. That's on you for actually upgrading an R class, but it's upgraded and it's been lost because the defences at Scapa Flow have not been upgraded properly. And I know I should have put that in the January 1939, but the trouble is getting those upgraded in January 1939 is physically impossible because people go, "Oh, where's the money coming from?" If I had the money and could get to spend money and do all the other things, there are a list of other things which I wanted to do above that. I would have the defences at Scapa Flow upgraded and fixed. I'd have had block ships sunk or concrete sunk. Huge amounts of it. Courageous? Well, the solution to that is actually, if you can go back again to the previous video where I talked about fitting fast fleet oilers with the building fast fleet oilers with the ability to attach a hangar and flight deck level to the top of them and quickly adapt them, because those then would be escort carriers which you could use for anti-submarine warfare operations. Now they'd be essential as oilers, but those things, if they had been properly built and adapted, and you had a few of them, let's say a dozen or so in service, and you could have had a dozen or so in service if you ordered them January 1939. Order them built in Canadian yards, etc., or maybe British yards, you could probably have had them built that quickly and in service by this point. They could take over that role. They could also be part of convoy forces with Swordfish flying off them doing anti-submarine warfare operations. They could be doing a lot of things for you. King George V, commissioned 1940. This is ultimately the other reason why there's not really much problem with the loss of the Royal Oak. You lose a surface ship if you're Japanese, Italian, German. You lose a capital ship, it's gone. The odds are you're not getting any replacements. You lose one at this point if you're British, and, well, we've got several in production. King George V commissioned. The British will commission 5 capital ships, broadly speaking, after 1939. King George V, Duke of York, Prince of Wales, Anson Howe. Vanguard comes in sort of post World War II. They will lose Royal Oak, Hood, Repulse, Prince of Wales. They will wear out Queen Elizabeth. Barham and Valiant are interesting ones. What happens to them? They're lost as well, really. They are well, they are lost. That's honest. Malaya, worn out, but they will commission new ones. That's the point. They're building new ships. There's a chance they'll replace them. Is there anything I can do to change this design once it's built to make it better? Get rid of the unrotated projectiles? They do that themselves. Not really. Do I need to do more than commission these ships? No. Commission them, use them. But really, the thing I can't afford to pause is carrier construction. And I would change that. I would also, and I have to admit this, I would also be probably conducting a policy of strategic replacement. In that I would be trying to build defenses where I could. Okay, what do I mean? I mean, if I know I'm going to have to withdraw ships, which I probably am going to have to do from the Far East, I would start the forces in the Far East digging in now. Okay, war has gone on. It isn't over by Christmas. The war is continuing to go on. It's going to cause me to commit assets. The Italians might get involved. I might have to be doing other things in the Mediterranean I don't want to be doing. I need to start digging in now in Malaya. I need to start digging in now in other places around the world. And I need to dig in firmly. I need to start implementing those defense plans whilst I have a modicum of control over the people involved. And it's not a naval thing, but it's a necessary thing. And it is a naval thing from the point of view of protecting infrastructure and key infrastructure around the world. I have got to start digging in. I've got to start really upgrading the fortifications around the world. And before you start going, well, all the assets are being committed to Europe and all this, they are true in terms of guns, etc. But I'm not talking about guns. I'm talking about digging trenches. I'm talking about digging air raid shelters. I'm talking about concrete positions. I can put guns on them. It doesn't matter if they're World War I era guns. I can find something for them. What I need to do is start putting them in there. I'm also, I have to admit at this point, I would be making sure any armed merchant cruisers I had torpedoes on them. In fact, I would have loved to have done that as part of the January 1939 one. But honestly, I'm not going to get away with that. January 1939. War's going to have started for me to be able to justify putting torpedoes on our merchant cruisers. But I want them to have torpedoes. I want them to have a nasty sting in the tail. So if they face something bigger than them that could kill them, it can get bushwhacked. And what is my justification for this? Well, Rawalpindi was sunk in November 1939. And she was very, very close to Scharnhorst and very, very close to Gneisenau. If she actually had torpedoes, goodness knows how much damage she could have caused. But there is another vessel which gets lost, which is another armed merchant cruiser, which is Jervis Bay. Now, Jervis Bay goes down fighting. She goes down fighting the Admiral Shear. That's what she's fighting. She's fighting the Admiral Shear. And again, they get quite close. She's outgunned, of course, by the 28cm, the 11-inch guns. But it managed to get in gun range. It keeps maneuvering but to distract. And it gets they get as close as they can. If they'd had torpedoes, who knows what they'd have done? Who knows what damage they might have done? It's a sensible thing. USA, what should they do? Well, I know there are different opinions of the Wildcat, but I like her. I will always like the Wildcat and the Hellcat. I will always love these pugnacious beauties. USA in January 1940, a war has broken out in Europe. What are they doing? Well, if I was them, I'd be putting the pedal to the metal on all my construction programs. I'd be ramping them up to maximum. I'd also be watching and trying to pay attention for securing my anchorages. It's going to be quite interesting once I get to January 1941, because I'm probably going to start hankering on about things like Taranto, etc., and the lessons of them. But in January 1940, there haven't yet been these lessons. There have been some interesting losses. The loss of Royal Oak in Scapa Flow, that's something which they should be considering. Pearl Harbor has pretty good anti-submarine defenses, but I would be pushing it by about now. I really would be. Their big weakness at the moment is they're still a navy in transition. They have a lot of good ideas going over. They're trying to secure things, but they are short of seaplanes. They are short of patrol aircraft. They are short of good aircraft in general. They're short of pilots. They're short of everything. They just need to keep building more. Their weakness is they're transitioning to a far higher spec navy than they've been kept at for most of the interwar period, thanks to the treaties and Congress disinterest. They are getting there, but it's taking time. But the big weakness they have, and this is something they should possibly have started to think about in early 1940, with some of the stories already coming out about torpedo performance, is, do our torpedoes really work, and shall we go and do some proper testing? They have the time. They could take the Mark 14 torpedo out and start doing some really thorough testing and find out if there are issues with it. That would have been tremendously helpful. I'm sure there have been many submarine commanders who would have been absolutely ecstatic if the Bureau of Ordnance had taken the torpedoes out and done some more thorough testing. Would have certainly made a lot of people very, very happy. And a lot safer. What about the Commonwealth Navy? The Commonwealth part of the Royal Navy. Well, they're having a slightly different time. They really are. Their cruisers are proving useful. HMS at this point, but soon to be HMNZS Achilles, takes part in the Battle of River Plate and quits herself very well, thank you very much. It's a glorious victory. And it is. HMS Sydney will have a very fun time in the Mediterranean coming up this year, including a battle with 2 Italian cruisers, which she will go, "Do you want to fight me?" And they'll go, Really, we'd rather not. You look a bit annoyed. You look very Australian. In fact, we're worried you might carry a kangaroo boarding party, so we're going to go rapidly the other direction. We were beating up British destroyers. We didn't realize they had a mummy nearby. Sorry. It works. But with the wider Commonwealth Navy, their weakness is that no one has really pushed the time into working out how to grow them. The Canadian Navy is the one exception. Their commanding officer has really invested in the idea of how to grow his Navy. And he is doing this ruthlessly and relentlessly. Growing the Navy. There is no surprise that the Canadian Navy ends up being as big as it is at the end of World War II, when you consider the pace, the voracious pace of growth that they put forward thanks to their commander. But honestly, the big weakness for all of them is infrastructure, and they need to invest in it. The Australians can say, oh, we're starting from this point, and the Canadians can do the same. And the Canadians have an advantage in terms of population, nearness to the United States, and able to deal with allied industry in order to supplement and grow their own industrial capability, because it's not just building factories, it's buying the machines and tools to put in those factories to actually manufacture the equipment you need. But there's no war in the Pacific at this point. So Australia could be doing the same thing. And really, Australia should be looking at what's going on in the war in Europe and thinking, the British are going to be distracted here. We need to rapidly mobilize and arm, both to assist the war effort. We've sending the scrap iron flotilla, but also to protect ourselves. And I think the thing I would be running at most would be a submarine program. If I was them, I would be working out how to build a domestic submarine program. Because yes, they're going to have issues, but there again, submarines in this period do a lot of cruising on the surface. It's not like modern SSKs and SSNs, which don't like to be anywhere near the surface at all. Aircraft, satellites have not yet reached the pervasive levels they will do, and even in World War II. So yeah, a submarine force can be sensible, but you have to have the art to build it. It's a dilemma for them. It really is. Ooh, what have we got coming up? Well, next week is going to be the Raimondo Montecelli class, which is doing well. We're making a pace through the Italian cruisers. We also have next month in August, the week after that, we have the Aldri, and then we're getting onto the Chathams, and then the Kronar class of the Swedish Navy. I've been looking forward to them. Bonus! So, if you have stayed watching the entire length, you will get to see this. If you haven't, and you'll also miss out on the question if you haven't watched this long. So, hello everyone who's made it. The question this week, the question for this video is this. It's a simple one. It really is. how would you, if you were Australia, go about rapidly improving your infrastructure so you could actually be more sustainable and defend? You've got 6 months. I'm going to say you've got till June, from January to June 1940, because you need to start building stuff, and the least amount of time it's going to take to actually launch things is a year. So you've got to get that infrastructure in place in 6 months. How do you go about it? Where do you buy the stuff from? My view is America. That's a sensible place to go and buy it, and buy the tooling and buy the equipment, get it over to Australia, and start building something. Now, my thing is, you should be building submarines and torpedo boats to be defensive. And again, if you've got Australian torpedo boats, which can be the most quick into the water, being built in Australia and being deployed forward to Singapore and places like that, they could have caused trouble for Japanese operations. But they also would make sense because even before, before Japan, even with no foresight, because they would be part of a defensive strategy of, yes, we haven't got as many cruisers here and haven't got as much ships as we normally have because they're off fighting a war. But what we have got is entire flotillas of torpedo boats, freeing them up to do the roles they really need to do, so that the roles they don't need to do, i.e. presence in our own harbours, etc., is done by, we have a flotilla of torpedo boats. In fact, 2 flotillas, 3 flotillas. Look at how they're multiplying. You turn your back and they multiply. Anyway, I thought you'd like this excerpt because it comes from a report with Admiral Cunningham being involved in it. It's the RM Mediterranean Fleet practicing shore bombardment in 1939. And the description of this: battleships and cruisers. All practices have actually taken place at dawn or have been arranged to represent bombardments at dawn on area targets such as a group of oil tanks, Dockyards Act. The essence of such an operation is to start hitting quickly, and I therefore approve the use of rapid ranging methods such as 4 2-gun salvos spread 200 yards, and also opening fire for effect with full gun salvos on enclosing target in an unverified 200-yard bracket. There's some interesting decisions going on here. Destroyers were instructed to exploit the many varieties of bombardment underway, and did so with commendable initiative and imagination. Am I the only one who gets slightly worried about someone saying destroyer commanders applied imagination to bombardment? I'm wondering how many exact variations of random reality that covers, especially when we consider the destroyers at this point include a tribal flotilla, a tribal destroyer flotilla, not yet renamed. I'm just saying that there are some ships which have 8 4.7-inch guns going, you told us to bombard? And we're allowed to exercise imagination? No practices at anchor were carried out, as it was not considered that this would be a requirement for Mediterranean destroyers, anyhow in the early stages of war. It was necessary to draw the attention of all destroyers to the futility of attacking bridges or road surfaces with high explosive shell. Okay, again, this is going to bring something I want to consider. A, during the war, we do realize that high explosive shell is really quite useful, but also, B, if they're bombarding these targets and high explosive shell is not considered viable for attacking them, what are they bombarding them with? Okay? What kind of thing are they developing to bombard them with? Because if you turn round to your average British destroyer crew and you go, your high explosive shells, they're not going to work for attacking that bridge, they're going to start thinking about what they can bombard that bridge with. That will do damage. This was posted by Marcus, Naval History War, on Twitter. Wonderful colleague from King's, a wonderful guy and absolutely amazing friend. But ever since it got posted, I've been slightly distracted trying to figure out exactly what they might have otherwise been testing out. It's a question. Another question. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. And yeah. Stand by for Sunday when there will be there'll be Brew Ships 83, which will have all sorts of interesting books, and also be announcing who's won, well, which of the voted for topics have won the Patreon vote. Take care. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your support. Thank you.